Meryl Streep spent much of her life carrying a family story that felt exceptionally rich, dramatic, and deeply personal. It was not some vague idea told once at a holiday table and then quickly forgotten. It was a core piece of how she understood exactly where she came from and who her people were. She firmly believed her ancestors were Sephardic Jewish and Dutch. Her family told her the Streep name had come through that specific path, uniquely shaped by escape, survival, and reinvention. In that beloved version of her history, the family carried Sephardic Jewish blood, and the surname itself held the ultimate clue to their past. The story claimed that Streep came from a literal line, or streep, physically drawn through an older Jewish name when the family finally arrived in the Netherlands. That specific detail gave the surname a kind of secret code quality. It was supposed to be a permanent mark of passage, a distinct sign of identity changed by painful exile and preserved through quiet custom. You can immediately see why a story exactly like that would last for generations. It offered movement, intense danger, and a name beautifully transformed but never erased. It linked her family directly to Sephardic Jews forced out of Spain, then successfully remade in the Netherlands. It turned a plain surname into a poetic symbol, making her ancestry feel like high drama rather than boring paperwork. For years, she emotionally accepted this elegant origin myth as the absolute truth. Then, modern genealogy and DNA testing walked into a private emotional space and permanently rearranged the furniture. On the national PBS series Faces of America, expert historians and genetic analysis pulled the entire family story apart piece by piece under studio lights. The DNA testing looked deeply at roughly the last 500 years of her ancestry. The results forced a completely full rethink of her identity. Her DNA came back as 100% European, with absolutely no detectable Sephardic Jewish or Dutch ancestry in that entire tracked time frame. That is a remarkably clean blow, not a partial correction or a small adjustment. The extensive paper trail did not rescue the old story either. Instead of an exotic Dutch Sephardic origin, the official documents pointed firmly toward German roots. Meryl Streep went on national television and watched a treasured identity story completely fall apart, losing a meaningful narrative many people never realize they are carrying until it is aggressively challenged. The documented roots on her father's side were actually Western European, specifically German, Swiss German, English, Irish, and Scottish. Surnames carry immense public power, and Streep had always been the visible badge of the whole legend. Professional genealogists traced her father's line back through old church books and civil records, proving the older form of the name was originally Streeb, spelled with a hard consonant at the end. That one single letter changes the entire emotional map. The name was deeply rooted in Lofenau, a small town located in the Black Forest region of Baden-Württemberg in Germany. Meryl Streep built one of the absolute most famous names in film on a surname that was not even her family's true older surname. The Streep family was not a temporary or passing presence in Lofenau. Parish records and local town histories show the name appearing generation after generation, proving the family was deeply embedded in the community. They belonged so fully to the village that one ancestor, George Streeb, successfully rose into civic leadership and served as mayor in the 1700s. Small, quiet villages often keep family names perfectly preserved like pressed flowers between the pages of time. People marry, farm, worship, die, and are remembered in the exact same narrow circle. Today, there are still about 15 Streebs actively living in Lofenau. The family did not completely disappear when some descendants chose to leave. They split, widened, and became both intensely local and internationally famous at the exact same time. But one specific branch did leave the village, and the agonizing choice to go was strictly bound up with a highly dangerous moment in European history. Genealogists found that her second great-grandfather, Gottfried Streep, left Lofenau right around the time of the 1848 German revolutions. Those difficult years were filled with intense unrest, fear, and failed liberal uprisings rapidly spreading across the German states, especially touching places like Baden. Families intimately connected to the revolt, or those who simply saw how quickly daily life could tighten around them, had to make exceptionally harsh choices. They had to urgently decide whether to stay and risk severe trouble or immediately leave and face the terrifying unknown. Gottfried Streep joined the massive wave of emigrants leaving that turbulent political world for the safety of America. The difficult move was shaped heavily by fear, extreme caution, and the urgent sense that staying had become far harder than leaving. Along the difficult journey across the ocean, official records shifted and hurried, clerks simplified the ending of the name. The final B fell away forever, and Streep became the permanent form that stayed in America. Surnames constantly move from one language setting into another, and what fits perfectly in one language can easily soften or bend in another. Meryl Streep inherited a name permanently modified by stressful migration, endless paperwork, and brutal survival. But the German roots tell only one part of her father's story. Another distinct line entered the family from Switzerland, revealing two totally different Central European stories inside the exact same family tree. Meryl Streep carries two closely related but completely separate immigrant streams. Her great-grandfather, Balthasar William Huber, was born in 1851 in Giswil, a small village located in the Swiss canton of Obwalden. He did not simply drift out of Europe in a calm, peaceful season. Balthasar actually emigrated during the violent years of the Franco-Prussian War, a massive conflict from 1870 to 1871 that created unprecedented political and economic upheaval across the entire continent. Families living in Swiss German regions faced severe borderland tensions and extremely wide uncertainty during that era. They could clearly see America not just as a faraway romantic idea, but as a substantially safer and far more promising future. Balthasar made the highly difficult choice to leave his village, crossing the Atlantic to permanently settle in New Jersey. His daughter Helena later became Meryl Streep's paternal grandmother, bringing the Huber branch directly into the family structure. These two fascinating lines finally converged in America. The German line from Lofenau and the Swiss-German line from Giswil fed into the exact same paternal tree. They were absolutely distinct enough to matter, coming from totally different specific villages and different historical moments of war and revolution. Yet they were culturally close enough to beautifully belong naturally together in a single American family. When people lazily label Meryl Streep's background as simply German, they completely erase the complex movement and the profound human choices that actually brought these different families across the ocean. She stands at the exact physical meeting point where these two 19th century Central European currents finally merged. However, the maternal side of Meryl Streep's ancestry shockingly pushed the timeline back even further, long before the European unrest of the 19th century. Researchers heavily tracing her mother's line did not find any hidden Sephardic roots there either. The evidence showed an incredibly broad mix of English, German, Irish, Scots-Irish, and Scottish ancestry, along with some remote French and Swedish roots. The ultimate surprise was not the geographic locations, but how shockingly early her ancestors actually arrived. The deep records reached right past 19th century Europe and went straight into the foundational building blocks of early English colonial America. Her maternal 8th great-grandfather, Lawrence Wilkinson, was remarkably part of the absolute first wave of English immigrants in Rhode Island. His name clearly appears in official colonial records uniquely tied to the mid-1600s, during the very earliest building years of Providence and Newport. Lawrence Wilkinson did not arrive after the brutal hard work of colonization was completely finished. He aggressively entered a fragile, extremely young colonial community that was still actively and dangerously taking shape. Because he bravely made that highly dangerous choice, his descendants spread heavily through New England and became an integral part of the region's most foundational colonial families. The maternal line absolutely did not stay frozen in Rhode Island, because families rapidly move when new systems officially open up. They heavily relied on extended kinship networks to successfully find fresh opportunities and safely bridge the gap between rough settlements. Later branches of the Wilkinson and strictly related maternal lines moved directly into Pennsylvania. They strongly appear in early land grant and deed records explicitly tied to William Penn's massive colony. Penn offered extremely cheap land, deliberately drawing these extended Quaker-linked family networks into his massive, ambitious colonial vision. Meryl Streep's direct ancestors were among the absolute first land purchasers actively working within that brand new Pennsylvania framework. Her mother's line incredibly touched two major founding moments: early English settlement in Rhode Island and the highly significant first wave of Quaker-linked land expansion in Pennsylvania. Meryl Streep ultimately inherited a vast, thoroughly documented map of relentless human movement. On one complex side, she comes directly from German revolutionaries and Swiss-German refugees aggressively fleeing 19th century European pressure. On the other distinct side, she descends directly from 17th century pioneers who helped lay the absolute physical groundwork for colonial America. The real, verifiable family tree holds far more severe tension, harsh conflict, and brilliant history than the tidy, elegant Dutch Jewish myth she grew up unconditionally believing. The old comfortable story was just a quiet, self-contained secret. The documented truth is a sweeping, majestic record of brutal survival, constant adaptation, and continuous movement. Just as the paper records completely rewrote her past, the advanced DNA testing delivered a completely unexpected collision in her present. Science looked straight beneath the surface of Meryl Streep's genome and incredibly found a direct link to another deeply famous public figure. Analysis absolutely proved that she shares about 30 million base pairs of identical DNA with popular television host Stephen Colbert. Meryl Streep and Stephen Colbert do not look like family, nor do they act anything like it. They built completely different, highly successful careers in entirely different cultural worlds. There is absolutely no shared famous surname and zero public family lore linking them together. But 30 million base pairs is a massive, screaming genetic signal. While the completely full human genome contains roughly 3 billion individual base pairs, finding 30 million identical pairs sitting in long, heavily matching segments is absolutely not a random coincidence. Geneticists strictly measure these critical shared segments in scientific units called centimorgans to track exact family links. Random, unconnected people from the exact same broad population might share tiny, totally broken fragments of DNA, but extremely long, identical segments only come from extremely recent shared ancestors. The testing strictly used autosomal DNA, which is the heavily mixed genetic material directly inherited from both parents. Autosomal DNA successfully carries critical pieces from many different branches of a family tree, getting continuously broken up and passed down in increasingly smaller chunks over the generations. Because Streep and Colbert share such a massive and undisputed stretch, their common ancestors were definitely not lost in the ancient fog of human history. They highly likely lived within the last few hundred years, roughly sitting right between the 1700s and the early 1800s. Somewhere in that very specific historical window, one single family branch began aggressively splitting into two entirely separate lines. Those completely distinct lines drifted totally apart, permanently losing all contact and completely dropping the shared family memory. Eventually, those completely invisible genetic threads perfectly led to Meryl Streep on one side and Stephen Colbert on the very other. The undeniable DNA result firmly placed them right in the range of third cousins once removed. Neither of their vast genetic lineages was wildly or unusually structured, effectively meaning this was absolutely not some strange technical fluke or testing error. It was the totally ordinary, unbending logic of family inheritance exposing a biological link that fragile paper records had long ago forgotten. Families frequently and easily lose track of cousins when people heavily move, marry, and change names over a span of 6 to 8 generations. But the human body stubbornly keeps a totally permanent record. Streep and Colbert were quietly carrying, overlapping, perfectly matching pieces of the exact same ancestral genome all along. The DNA reached straight across the heavy noise of modern celebrity and beautifully proved they were real family in a way you can still actively and scientifically trace. Meryl Streep went on national television and bravely watched her entire inherited identity shift completely under harsh studio lights. She fully and completely surrendered a deeply cherished, highly romantic legend about Sephardic Jews and a dramatic line physically drawn through a name. In immediate return, she received a complex history that was significantly harder, far more ordinary, and entirely, indisputably verifiable. Her surname was actually born from the very real German Streep family in Lofenau. It was carried across the violent, unpredictable ocean by a terrified man fleeing the terrifying 1848 revolutions. Her blood physically and undeniably holds the Swiss-German heritage of Balthasar William Huber, who urgently left Obwalden during the highly destructive Franco-Prussian War. Her mother's side reaches straight back into the raw, untested dirt of early Rhode Island and the very first Quaker land grants of William Penn. Her autosomal DNA connects her directly and biologically to Stephen Colbert, proving beyond doubt that even the absolute most famous people on Earth are tied together by totally invisible, undeniable family threads. Meryl Streep took a simple immigrant name violently shaped by political fear and rushed paperwork, and she brilliantly carried it directly into the absolute highest reaches of modern global culture. She lost a beautiful, perfectly tidy myth, but she inherited a brilliantly documented historical masterpiece.